Hey internets, so as it turns out, journoids aren't very honest when it comes to the polls, with various shenanigans being played as you get closer and closer to an election time. And the interesting thing is, the reason why they tend to lie about this is a little bit more messed up than most people realize. It's not always a case of people who are biased looking for datasets that they want to see. There is in fact a pretty big incentive for big players in the corporate media to push propaganda that they know probably isn't true. And to find out what those incentives are and answer this question, let's just look at a recent example. The Donald Trump trial and the 34 convictions, where Trump was found guilty. Oh no. Now I'm not going to go too in-depth into the Trump trial, that's a subject for another video. Again, this is just about deceptive use of polling. So I'm going to look at it instead as something that Rachel Maddow had to say, roughly a couple weeks ago, in tow with this interesting narrative that a guilty verdict in the Trump trial that just recently happened would result in a fairly hefty loss in support, claiming a 6% loss. That's a pretty big swing. However, of course, 2 weeks later after the conviction, this prediction turned out to be untrue. If we take a look at the latest polling data from Real Clear Politics, which is a pretty good source since they tend to combine multiple polling sources, this alleged 6-point swing seems to have not manifested at all in any way, shape, or form with the latest polling. So it seems once again MSNPC's narrative is complete and total nonsense. Whoever could have guessed. Interestingly enough, it seems that voters don't really seem to be swayed that much against Trump from this conviction on the Stormy Daniels hush money really at all. His polling numbers and the most up-to-date averages of the five-way race instead to appear to have increased in his favor by 0.7. And the swing states haven't shown any significant changes either, with the averages still showing a slight lead towards Trump. So that just brings up the question then, how did MSNPC and various other outlets and pundits foobar this narrative up so badly? They got it completely wrong. They seem to be telling us with extreme confidence that this conviction would completely bury Trump's support 6 feet under, and yet as it turns out, it seems like other people either don't care at all, or they view the conviction as a bogus kangaroo court charge, or some other reason. But for the most part, people seem to have actually increased their levels of support by a tiny margin. So again, how and why did MSNPC get it wrong? The short answer is that it was just propaganda, because it's very easy to be deceptive when it comes to the use of polling data. But for the longer answer, let's see what Rachel Maddow actually had to say. Now, I'm not actually going to play the clip because A, MSNPC aggressively uses Content ID, and B, her voice is annoying. But the TLDR of it is, she stated that this felony conviction, in the context, of course, of the Stormy Daniels trial where Trump was convicted on 34 counts, as you can see on the screen where she was talking, has been an open and evolving question with the public. And then goes on to cite various polls which allegedly claim that Trump's conviction would make him lose a ton of support. The problem is that with these polls, they either A, don't really say what she's implying they say, or B, the poll itself is too old or flawed. The first poll she cites from the New York Times was done in November, before people had any real details. And again, it's by the New York Times. There's various other problems with it, but I won't go into it because honestly this one is just too old to matter. Maddow then went on to misrepresent the poll from the Washington Post, as the question didn't specify any specific criminal conviction, and also didn't ask if they would vote for him or not, but was rather a question of fitness for the presidency. Those might seem like minor differences, but if you think about it, they're actually quite big. Asking a voter if a candidate is fit doesn't actually tell you that much, since people mostly know that they're just voting for the lesser of two evils. And failing to specify a crime makes the question way too broad. Are we talking about a stupid conviction about something that arguably shouldn't even be against the law in the first place? Or are we talking about a very serious crime like child assault? The more subjective and broad a question in a poll, the less accurate the result is going to be, as people will be thinking very different things when giving their answer. This is something we've known about polls for a long time. The way you word a question and the way you add specific details or don't have specific details can produce some wildly different results. The poll from Bloomberg had the same problem. The question it asked was just way too broad. You gotta specify which conviction you're talking about. This poll also had an additional problem. The sample size that was skewed toward left liberals who are obviously not going to vote for him anyways. Beware the fallacy of averages, the source of oh so very many misuses of statistics. Now, the final poll she cites actually does specify that the crime being discussed here is the hush money trial, and this poll showed that most people do not care. A less biased view of it from the Hill made it clear that the results overall showed that there'd be little to no impact. And this is where things get interesting. Maddow then skipped to the part where the poll asked Republican voters if they would be more or less likely to vote for Trump, and it shows on screen that 52% of them would be more likely. But if you actually watch the MSNPC video clip I'm talking about here, you'll notice that Maddow only reads the part of that states 10% would be less likely to vote for him, with the 52% number unmentioned and only staying on screen for 10 seconds. This is a very common dishonest rhetorical trick that propagandists like her like to pull. They will show people the truth, but then audibly misrepresent it, so that way their dishonesty becomes a half-truth, and they can simply play dumb later if anyone ever calls them out on it. She knows full well that a good portion of people wouldn't notice that what she's saying is being contradicted by what she's showing on screen. It's very stupid propaganda, and it's very easy to spot, but of course they keep doing it anyway because, sadly, people fall for it. But the summary of this whole thing is that dishonest pundits will cite a poll that asked a highly broad question as if the poll asked a more specific question, and then pretend that it's exactly the same thing. And that's precisely the propaganda technique that Maddow was utilizing here. She specifically stated this felony conviction in the context of reporting on the conviction of the Stormy Daniels case, but again, that's not actually what most of these polls were asking people, which is why the fact that the RCP polls now show that MSNPC's narrative was wrong really shouldn't come as a big surprise to anybody. The real question is, why is it then that journoids push these obvious lies when it comes to polling? Why is it some of the polls seem to wildly skew towards one side or the other? And the answer is because misrepresenting polls can have an effect on election results. There's roughly 6 to 12% of the population who doesn't really consider policy at all when they vote. Instead, they're voting entirely based on whoever they think is going to win because they want to be on the bandwagon. They want to be part of the winning team. And I think we all have seen at least one example of this guy, that type of person who just wants to fit in and is willing to morph their view about what the majority of society tells them to think. And that's what this polling propaganda really targets. Partisan journoids know that they can try and skew election results in their favor by misrepresenting who is winning or what people are thinking, because there's a portion of the population who will try to align what they think and what they vote for entirely based on what they believe other people are going to think and vote for. Or in other words, it's all a big sophistry grift to try and get the NPC vote. And so seeing Rachel Maddow engaging in this kind of dishonest rhetoric really isn't that surprising, because her audience is probably, well, you know, that. Anyways, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like or subscribe or comment, and if you really liked it, you can leave me a tip on Ko-Fi. Or buy some merch. That is all. Till next time.